Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Big box retailers, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a bill in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. Senate Bill 1838 would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, visit handsoffmyrewards.com and tell them to oppose credit card routing legislation paid for by the Electronic Payments Coalition.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock and the Pavilion with Stephen Wallace. In each show, Stephen will interview someone connected to the world of horse racing or cricket.
Richard Pitman will be 80 on the 21st of January. The former national hunt jockey of the 1960s and 1970s, who was part of the BBC horse racing team for 37 years, has been a popular and regular guest on the Paddock and the Pavilion since I first spoke to him in December 2020, ahead of one of his favourite races, the King George VI Chase at Kempton. So I thought it was only right to celebrate the Cheltenham boys' special day. As well as clips from previous shows, you can never tire of Richard's stories. I've spoken to several friends and colleagues from his racing days for their thoughts on this special occasion. In this podcast, you will be joined by former jockey and now world-famous sculptor Phillip Blacker, Newmarket trainer Gay Kelleway, whose father Paul rode with Richard at Fred Winter's yard in the 1960s and 1970s, young racing journalist Sam Martin, writer Tania Kindersley, who is part of the charity Horseback UK, and the 1980 Grand National winning jockey Charlie Fenwick. Author and racing historian Chris Pitt is also on hand to fill in any gaps about his riding career. If you love racing, you are in for a treat. Let's hear how Richard first found his way to Cheltenham races. Do you recall when you first went to the racecourse?
Oh, yes, very, very clearly. I used to play truant. I used to go to school 7 miles away at Tewkesbury in the grammar school there, and whenever it was Cheltenham races, I would have my school clothes on and I'd have my racing clothes in my little satchel. And I used to change up the road about 100 yards away in the middle of an old burnt-out oak tree. So I would leave my school clothes in my bag hanging in the oak tree while I climbed over the fields, about 3 fields, over the railway, which was in use at the time, and I'd sit quietly in the inside of the wings of the fence at the top of the hill and wait and then see the action. So yes, from about the age of 11, I used to go to Cheltenham and watch the action. It was so exciting.
And how did his riding career start? Not very well, as Richard will now explain. His first ride came in September 1961.
I didn't have an early influence because I failed 9 O-levels at Tewkesbury Grammar School. What does a small person who can ride, what do you do? So I went in and it was a job. Funny enough, my brother-in-law was a jockey at that time, and I didn't look up to him. It was just a job. And then it took 4 years, Stephen, before I rode a winner. 4 years of actually having a licence.
I was going to ask you about your first ride, actually. Do you remember the horse?
Oh, yeah, Rosargio, I think it was, at Hereford. I looked like an agricultural worker and I didn't improve much through my career. But anyway, the point was, it was a job, that was all. And funnily enough, during my time, this was at Cheltenham, Woodmancote near Cheltenham, there were quite a few trainers then used to train up on Cleve Hill, 10. David Nicholson's father, Frenchie, was one of them. As I say, rode for these 4 years without a winner from 60 rides. It was quite embarrassing.
Yeah, I was going to say that. You've actually taken the words out of my mouth, because I read where it said in the Sporting Life, Pitman rides winner at 60th attempt. You must have been relieved to get a winner.
You wouldn't believe I was filling out petrol somewhere, and the attendant said, "Oh, I know you." And I said, "Well, I don't know how you know." "Oh, yeah, you're the jockey who can't ride a winner." But my thinking, Stephen, was wrong. I thought if I stayed in these small stables, you'd get rides. But of course, although you get rides, you get the horse with one eye and three bad legs. And the moment they've got one good enough, in comes the proper jockey, you see.
Richard's career changed for the better in 1964 when he joined former National Hunt champion jockey Fred Winter, who was about to start training in Lambourn.
So then when I understood Fred Winter was going to retire that season, I asked him, could I join him? He said, yeah, I've watched you ride. You're okay. You'll never be champion jockey, but you're okay and you're honest, and horses jump better for you than they do for a lot of people. So come and join me, and we'll see how we go. So I got a letter in May, I suppose, and it said, Dear Pitman, if you still wish to join me, I want to see you here on June the 1st. We don't have any accommodation at the moment, but I have a very good hut at the tennis court where we keep stuff, and it's June, so it'll be warm. I think it'll be fine for a while. So, I mean, that was the start of my career with Fred Winter in his tennis hut.
Well, what a great opportunity to start with Fred Winter, the former champion jockey, legend, really.
Well, I went to him because I knew that he would be successful. He was such a strong man with great connections. And we only had 6 horses when I joined him the first week. 3 of us were there, but they quickly grew because he had a winner straight away. Jay Trump, who went on to win the National in his first year, was a winner. They say it was his first runner. It actually wasn't. I went off 10 minutes earlier at Ludlow on a horse called 177, who Fred he was the only one who could ride him at home because he pulled so hard. And so I tootle off to Ludlow. Tommy Smith, the American amateur, went to Sandown for Jade Trump. And Fred said to me, you won't hold this horse. You can't hold him at home. You won't hold him in a race. So what I want you to do is at the starting tape, face the opposite way to the way the horses are going to go. And then when the tapes go up, turn round and follow him behind. Well, we did that. And I couldn't hold him, 14 runners. He burst his way through the field, quickly round the first bend at Ludlow is a fence. He saw the fence and went, yahoo, and stood off so far. You know, I'd never ridden anything of this class. And he pulled me out of the saddle because I hadn't slipped the reins. And he pulled me out like a stone out of a catapult. And I landed running in front of him. I landed on the other side when he was still jumping the fence. It was quite incredible. I got a real kicking. And when I got home, Fred said, well, you learn by your mistakes. You won't get another ride for 3 months. So that's how you learn. So people who think that Jay Trump was his first runner are incorrect. I was on his first runner, 177, but it ended only about 30 seconds after it started.
Wouldn't you love to see a video of Richard riding 177 at Ludlow? And I wonder how long he lived in Fred's tennis hut. One young jockey who remembers meeting Richard in those early days was Phillip Blacker. Can you remember the first time you met Richard?
I can actually, yes. I can remember it very well. I just started in racing, and I was working for Captain Tim Forster. And I was sharing digs with Graham Thorner in Letcombe Regis. And we were going to the races. I don't know why I was going to the races, because I don't think I had any rides in those days. I was an 18-year-old amateur rider. And anyway, I think we were heading off down to Plumpton, and we gave Richard Pitman a lift to Plumpton. And I always thought, I remember thinking what a nice chap he was. And because professional jockeys could, in those days anyway, professional jockeys could be a bit aloof with sort of green amateurs like me. And he was particularly nice. And then the next time, I didn't see him for a long time after that, until maybe a year or so later, when I had moved to Major Verley Buick, who trained near Didcot. And I was trying to get some rides from him, and I was working for him. And Richard Pitman was first jockey, and so I met him again then. So that those are the first two occasions, as far as I can remember.
The day in the life of a jockey was very different in Richard's day, and in this clip, he describes the various challenges they all faced.
Weight issues are the killer, really. The riding is the good. Every jockey will tell you the riding is the best part of the job. The travelling, you're poor. I hadn't ridden winners. I had got a Mini. You had to bump start it to get it going in the morning, that sort of thing. So driving to all these far-flung places was not good. The wasting was awful. And in my day, it was not banned then, but it has been for years, a pill called Lasix, which they give to horses in America to stop them bleeding. But Lasix is a diuretic, and it just makes you go to the loo for 2.5 hours, and you are losing all the fluid from your body. But the side effect of that is that you get cramp in all your extremities, your elbows, your shoulders, your hips, your knees, you get cramp. And the other thing is you could hear yourself speaking, not round and through your ear, but booming inside your head. Terrible stuff. But you could lose 7 or 8 pounds. And the first pill I ever took from a fit, looking at me now, you'd never think it, but from a fit, hard, athletic body, I lost 11 pounds in wee. I mean, that is just terrible. Of course, it's banned, but not a nice thing to do when you're doing a physical job. But Stephen, adrenaline is a great thing. We've all ridden in those days with broken bones. You break your left wrist and you'd show your right one to the doctor and say, no, it's fine. And you'd have a broken left wrist and go ride. You could do those things. Happily, the game has changed. I mean, also when I started, they were just little cork helmets with no chin straps or anything. And if you hit a fence hard, the cork helmet would fly out in front of the jockey. They were of no use whatsoever. And no back pads or anything like that. John Frankham's mother, Lil, loved him dearly, as all mothers do, and she invented the back pad by sewing bits of cut-out polystyrene on a vest for him. Quite ingenious. But anyway, I'm digressing. And so, yes, the travelling was hard. The wasting was awful. And the injuries, well, they came, you knew they would, but you didn't expect it to be today, you see. So we all rode and loved it. The camaraderie of being a jockey was fantastic. You can imagine with the great blonde bombshell Biddlecombe in the weighing room, and his great mate Josh Gifford. It was a magical place to be.
By the start of the 1970s, Richard was now riding for the most powerful jumping yard in the country. Fred Winter was champion trainer for the first time in the 1970-71 season and won the title for the next 4 seasons. And moving on to your golden years between 1970 and 1975, when you rode some sort of legendary horses, Bula, Pendle, Lanzarote, Crisp, Galani. What was it like riding those horses at the peak of your powers?
I'm not sure I ever had a peak of my powers, but I had a good 5 years when we had those good horses. And we mentioned Kempton earlier on, we would go to Kempton and Sandown, Newbury. We'd have a double every weekend. And both Pendle and Lanzarote wrapped up 11 wins in a row each. And most of those were around Kempton. They loved Kempton Park. There was pressure, but they were good jumping horses on the whole. I only rode Bula in one hurdle race, and then his following year in novice chases, where he won 4 of his 5 and fell in the other one. He was an electric horse. Not a very good horse to work at home, but the moment you showed him an obstacle, wow, didn't he wake up. Paul Kelleway rode him to win his 2 champion hurdles, and John Frankham took him over after his novice chase years. Pendle was incredible. When we first schooled him over fences, he was only a cheap buy, 3,000 quid, won one small hurdle race at Catterick. When we put him over steeplechase fences at home, We went over the three fences at Lambourne. Brilliant. And Fred Winter said, I've seen enough, take him home. I said, well, don't you want to see if it was a fluke? He said, no, I know a good horse when I see one, take him home. He is brilliant. And he was, always. And as I said to you about the photograph there, he could stand off outside the wings and get just as easily the other side. It wasn't an effort to him at all. Crisp was the most amazing horse. He was big, strong, muscular, pulled hard, jumped from the front, superb. I mean, the ride he gave me in the Grand National 73 was a memory I'll take to my grave. A great horse. And both he and Pendle beat Tingle Creek, at different tracks, getting course records. They were very, very good horses. Lanzarote was a former flat horse, won the Champion Hurdle. He wasn't as good as Comedy of Errors. Comedy of Errors beat him most times, but we did outfox him to win the 74 Champion Hurdle. We talked about it, and I said his only weakness, Comedy of Errors, was to go out right-handed when he's under pressure. And Fred Winter said, right, make it a stamina race then. We'll put a pacemaker in. And we put in one called Calzado, ridden by the Earl of Harrington's second son, DC Stano, to make it a fast pace, you see, and put Comedy of Errors under pressure. And blow me, Calzado made the run into the first and then stopped. So I had to make a quick decision, right, what do we do here? And the decision was, the plan was to put him under pressure. Let's do so. So I kicked on from about the second hurdle, which was being the donkey, really, but it worked. So coming down the hill, Comedy of Errors jumped right twice, and we won by a couple of lengths. So the plan worked, but he wasn't quite as good as Pendle and Crisp. And Killiney, who you mentioned, most people wouldn't know him now, won 9 of his 10, one at the Cheltenham Festival, the RSA, the Novices Gold Cup. And then we ran him 3 weeks later at Ascot, and he had a fall and broke his shoulder. And I was knocked out. And I thought in my mind when I came round that I'd seen him standing on his feet. And I was still in the ambulance room lying on the little bed there. When his owner came in, it was her first horse. And he was such a good horse. He could have been anything. And when she told me that he died, I burst out crying. Now, for a grown man to be crying is embarrassing, but it was the emotion of the whole thing. Anyway, she picked me up off this little truckle bed with one hand and slapped my face with the other. She said, how can I have horses if you fall apart like this? Anyway, off she went and came back later and apologized and gave me a very nice present. She said, I was so upset myself and to see you upset, and she gave me a very handsome little present to take the wife out to supper. So Killiney could have been anything, Stephen. He, in fact, was making a whistle noise as he exhaled, which indicated soft palate or some breathing malfunction. And we were going to operate on his breathing that summer. Well, if he was as good as that when he was wrong in the respiratory area, how good could he have been? We'll never know.
Probably the best horse that Richard rode was Pendle, who he rode to victory in the 1972 and 1973 King George VI chase. But did he stay the 3¼ miles of the Cheltenham Gold Cup?
Very good horse. Now, everybody seems to think he didn't stay the 3¼ miles of the Gold Cup and he was just a 3 mile of the King George, and that is not true. He had this little quirk that when he was in front, he'd pull up underneath you, and it was embarrassing. He needed company, and both King Georges we won easily, so I was keeping hold of his head and squeezing him all the time, and there was so much more in the tank, even though he won easily, and it looked as if, well, I could sprint anywhere, but he was not dying underneath me, but he was always just coming back. It's a horrible position to be in, but he was just king at that time. Pendle in 73, odds-on favourite, and we talked about tactics. I wanted to come after the last because he was a funny little horse when he hit the front. And Fred Winter, who'd won several Gold Cups as a rider, said, "No, Richard, if you miss the last in a competitive Gold Cup, you won't get back. I'd rather you got beaten from being there too soon." Well, how prophetic was that? I hit the front 2 out, went to the last 3 clear, and the roar of the crowd and the colour of people and throwing hats in the air, and poor old Pendle pricked his ears and stopped momentarily, but enough to lose his stride. The Dickler came past him, Pendle fought back, short head was the distance, a stride later I'm half a length clear. So it was an important race, and I don't mind talking about it. The next year he was favourite again, Pendle. And Fred Winter said, "Do what you like, hold him up this time." And coming down the hill, he was running away, as if he'd just started the race. And I pulled him in behind High Ken, who wasn't a great jumper, going to the second last, because I didn't want to hit the front. But as I pulled in behind, the Dickler and Captain Christie have come up on my outer specifically to hem me in. That's race riding. High Ken fell, brought Pendle down, end of that story. He should have won 2 Gold Cups. But just an aside and a quick one, the lad who did him in the paddock said, "Get this horse withdrawn." I said, you can't, he's favourite. He said, no, there's a threat, an IRA threat to have him shot if he hits the front. Now, whether it was IRA or who or what, but he'd been sleeping with that horse for 10 days and then working all through the day. A jockey cannot get a horse withdrawn. Starter vets get them withdrawn. And when it went down, of course, both Fred Winter and the lad thought the horse had been shot. And I came in and said to Terry Biddle, "Story." He said, "That wasn't very fair." I said, "No, it wasn't, was it? No, they could have missed you and got me."
16 days after finishing second in the 1973 Cheltenham Gold Cup on Pendle, Richard was on board crisp in the race he will always be remembered for, the 1973 Grand National. But firstly, why would a horse that won the Champion Chase by 25 lengths even be entered for the Grand National?
Well, in between winning the Champion Chase so easily, that he was tried. Fred Winter thought he'd be a Gold Cup horse, and we tried that route. I held him up as you would a 2-miler in a 3 1/4 mile race, and he sulked. He didn't like it. His natural exuberance and character was front running and bold jumping, and we were bang there at the last, but finished 5th, and just wasn't good enough on the day. But to me, it sulked, and we'd taken away his character. So we talked about the National, and Fred said, "Well, what you would normally do," he had 12 stone. There were Gold Cup winners in it. Les Scargo was in it. He had nearly the same weight. He said you would drop him out last of the 40, go around and switch him off. But he said you won't get round. He is so bold jumping that you will jump on the back of another horse, you'll end up on the floor, and you can't win if you fall. So he said, we'll make the running on the inside, save a lot of ground, and try and settle the pace of the race down. Because quite often, I was a senior jockey at the time, a race can be dominated from the front by a senior jockey. If he slows it down, the others are quite content to do that. Well, that was the theory. In practice, he saw the first fence and wow, most incredible feeling. He would quicken of his own volition. I never had to see a stride on him because he saw his own stride and would be airborne. And he was never running away with me. I mean, obviously, I got a lot of criticism. People said he ran away with me. Never was he out of control at all. It was his speed quickening into the fence, going low and fast over it, and landing, galloping. He was galloping before he even hit the ground. So each fence, and there are 30 of them, he was gaining a lot of ground. And the only other horse upsides me was Grey Sombrero on the wide outside, Bill Schumacher riding, and he fell at the chair, which then that's the 15th, which left me well clear. And to go out onto that second circuit, Stephen, normally the noise is tremendous from the horses around you.
You had nothing.
And there was nothing. It was silent and eerie. And as I faced down to what would have been the first fence on first time round, hole in the fence, a few jockeys standing there watching, you know, who'd fallen early on. One of them was leaning on the rail holding a bridle. So when he'd come off his horse, he'd gone up the neck and taken the bridle off the horse. No horse, he's just holding a bridle. And so it was quite eerie. And in those days, the public address system went all the way around the course. And I could hear Michael O'Hare quite clearly. Had a great voice, you know, very rich Irish voice. Good, great commentator. And we jumped away down to Beecher's, just in silence. I'm listening to the commentary. And we got to Beecher's and he flew it. Now, in those days, the drop was big, and most horses, to balance themselves, their nose would nearly or quite often hit the ground. So you had to slip your reins and get your body weight back on the horse's back side to act as ballast to keep him, you know, keep his bottom down. Because once their tail comes past their head, you are in trouble. So Chris never even nodded at Beecher's Brook because he jumped so far over it that he sort of flattened out the drop, if you see. He was the most amazing horse, and he did it both times. And at the canal turn, because I was so far clear, just go back a minute. I could hear Michael O'Hare, as I went to Beecher's, saying, "And Dick Pitman's 25 lengths clear. He's going away from the pack, and the pack is led by Red Rum, and Fletcher is kicking Red Rum." I thought, that'll do for me then, if he's having a kick, you know. Yeah. And then, just before the next fence, David Nicholson is sitting on, I can't remember the horse, Barsnet or something. He was sitting there like an Indian chief with his arms folded on the horse's back, and the horse was eating grass. And he said quite clearly, "Richard, you're actually 33 and a half lengths clear. Kick on and you'll win." Well, he spoke like that. We used to call him the Duke, you know, amongst us uneducated fellows. The Duke was educated. Yeah. And I thought, no, kicking on is the last thing I have to do. Stamina is in doubt. I've got to hold his head. But for the canal turn, which, as you know, is a right-angled jump, I was able, because I was on my own, to move out and cut across the corner, almost touching the flag on the corner, and saving lengths. He was absolutely brilliant there. But you can then see the grandstands for the first time, but they're 3/4 of a mile away. It's still a long, long way. So keep hold, keep hold, keep hold. And I never heard another horse until going to the second last fence, which is on the racecourse proper, and I could hear on the firm ground the hoofbeats, the drum, 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 drum. And the horse was Red Rum, and he exhaled, his nostrils flapped, which did a... There aren't many that do that. It's called high blowing. So I could hear drum, drum, getting louder and louder. And it's like when you're a kid and you're having nightmares and you're walking in treacle and the bogeyman's following you, you can't get out of it. It was a horrible feeling, but I was still so far clear that I hoped that I would hang on. But all of a sudden, like your car running out of petrol, so at the second last, the warning signs were there. And he was a good moving horse. You could see his legs going out in front of him, and his legs were even going sideways slightly, you know, with tiredness. And he had loppy ears like that, like that. And even his ears went... Now, when you have lost the strength out of your ears, you have got to the bottom of the barrel. And so it became agonizing. And then I made a boyish mistake, which I'll live with, and I'll hold my hands up. I lost Fred Winter, the National, through picking my stick up to wake him up. And I picked it up in my right hand when I had to go right-handed to get round the elbow on the run-in. And the moment a big, strong, very heavy horse, when I took my hand off to give him a crack, he died away from me, you see, because I'd taken away the rudder, if you see. I should have stayed riding, hands and heels holding him together, and got round the elbow. So as he dropped away, I've had to sit down, pull him back, and I was still, 3-4 lengths clear at the elbow, halfway up the run-in. And Brian Fletcher very cleverly challenged wide. And the reason that he did that, if he challenged close to me, it re-energizes a horse to find a bit more. And remember, it was only 2 strides from the winning post that Red Rum actually caught him. So that was a race I lost that I should have won, and it was a big one that got away. Fred Winter was a gentleman. The owners of Just a Manifold took it well. They said you did your best. In inverted commas, it wasn't good enough, but they were absolutely brilliant. If I'd have trained the horse and someone else had done what I'd done, I'd have pulled them off and kicked their backside. But I have to live with that, Stephen.
Phillip Blacker gives his thoughts on that famous race. And is he too hard on himself when he talks about Crisp and the 1973 Grand National?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. He couldn't have done anything else, really, because the horse sort of was bounding from fence to fence, and he couldn't really do anything else. And, of course, on the run in, the horse was drunk. He was absolutely exhausted. And Richard always feels that he probably could have done something else, but he couldn't. The horse was just he was completely knackered. So I don't think Richard did anything wrong at all. You know, I rode in that race and I finished 4th on Spanish Steps, and I was never on the bridle, and I was on a really classy horse. You know, I was never on the bridle. I finished 4th, but I was bitterly disappointed because I thought I was going to win before the race. But it was a hell of a race.
Has there ever been a better first 4 past the post than Red Rum, Crisp, L'Escargot and Spanish Steps?
Say goodbye to your credit card rewards. Big box retailers, led by Walmart and Target, are pushing for a bill in Congress to take away your hard-earned cash back and travel points to line their pockets. Senate Bill 1838 would enact harmful credit card routing mandates that would end credit card rewards as we know it. If you love your credit card rewards, visit handsoffmyrewards.com and tell them to oppose credit card routing legislation paid for by the Electronic Payments Coalition.
Richard retired from riding on the 31st of May 1975. And in our next clips, Phillip Blacker gives his jockey's verdict on Richard's qualities in the saddle, while Tania Kindersley, daughter of former jockey and trainer Gay Kelleway, gives her views on what Richard represented as a jockey in the 1960s and 1970s. What do you think were his qualities as a jockey?
Well, he would say he hadn't got any. In fact, the other day, it was only the other day when we met at some event, and we were discussing jockeyship, and he said to me, "You were a very good jockey, you know. I was useless." Which is ridiculous because he was so successful, and you know, if he wasn't much good, Fred Winter wouldn't have employed him. But he was. His best qualities were probably he had a good racing brain, and he sort of was always aware of what was going on in a race.
The thing about somebody like Richard Pitman is he's not just Richard Pitman. You know, he was an extraordinarily talented jockey in his own right. A really nice person to deal with, always smiling, always sunny. But now for people of my generation, I'm in my 50s, he represents a kind of jockey which we oldies think don't really exist anymore. So he represents a type of jockey, and I'm not saying better or worse, good or bad, different from what we see now. So he was part of my father's generation, where just little things that make me smile. You know, they'd ride a 3.5 mile chase wearing a polo neck jumper. They didn't have silks in the winter. Jump jockeys, they wore jumpers, and there was none of this going to the gym to get fit. You know, some of them would run a bit, but most of them would go dancing and then go sweat it all off in the in the steam baths in Jermyn Street, and then get in the car and drive off to Sandown or Kempton or Ascot or wherever it was. And that was the kind of thing my dad used to do. And it was wild. It was a lot less professional. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, these were brilliant jockeys who did extraordinary things. When you think of what Fred Winter did without a bridle, I mean, they could do extraordinary things. But I mean, as in, there just wasn't that. Okay, I'm going to say something radical. I'm not sure they thought of it like a job. I think they thought of it as a passion. It was a love. It was, for some of them, an obsession. And there is something rather lovely about that. And it may be that one looks back at my age and you think every summer was sunny. But when I look at the Richard Pitmans of this world, and there was a buccaneering spirit, I suppose, which I love. And so when you think of somebody who's ridden in all the races he's ridden in and won, the trophies he's won and known the horses he's known, he is admirable in his own right and exciting to think of in his own right, but he represents that generation which just was a little bit different. And I love that because I'm an old fogey.
So let's hear the details of Richard's riding career from author and racing historian Chris Pitt.
Well, Richard's riding career pretty much coincided with when I first got interested in racing, and these guys who went round were my heroes. And I've got a scrapbook picture of Richard riding his first winner on Indian Spice at Fontwell Park, jumping the last fence with a horse called Rum Club. And right at the very end of Richard's career, when he had his last ride on St Swithin at Stratford in the 2 mile 6 furlong handicap chase there, I was stood right by the last fence, and I still remember to this day Richard in those green collars on St Swithin inspecting the last fence as I called out to him, "Good luck, Richard," and he acknowledged me, and that was great. But an awful lot happened in between those times, of course, and we all know about Pendle, and we all know about Crisp and his narrow defeat in the Grand National, which of course wasn't the only occasion on which Richard was second in the Grand National, because he was also second on Steel Bridge 4 years earlier in the race won by Highland Wedding. But 400 odd winners later, he retired in 75. And when you look back, he was twice runner-up in the Jockeys table in 1972-73 to Ron Barry with 84 winners. And again, the following year, 73-74, with 79, once again to Mr. Barry. Pendle, I suppose, is the horse that we remember Richard with, and he's unfortunately remembered more for not winning the 73 Gold Cup. But for me, I think his greatest performance was in the 73 Massey Ferguson, about 9 months after Cheltenham, when, carrying 12 stone 7, he beat a pretty useful horse called Helmsman, giving him £34 by, according to the form book, very easily 1.5 lengths, with the Dickler, the horse that had deprived him of the Gold Cup, some 20 lengths back in third place. That was a sort of Arkle-type weight concession. And earlier in the season, he'd won the Benson and Hedges chase, 12 stone 3, giving £27 to that year's Mackeson Gold Cup winner, Red Candle. I mean, they were terrific performances. And if you look also at Richard's win big races, he's won the Whitbread Gold Cup, the Hennessy, the Great Yorkshire Chase, the SGB, the Cathcart, and his first big win came in the 1966 Imperial Cup, a race he won again later on Lanzarote, riding a horse for Fred Winter called Royal Sanction. So, Richard, I would like to wish you a very, very happy 80th birthday. I'm celebrating my big 7-0 later this year, and I hope when in 10 years' time that I'll still look as well and feel as healthy as you. All the very best to you, Richard.
Thanks, Chris. You got your birthday wishes in early. Now back to Richard, where he recalls the beginning of his media career with the BBC and what it was like to work with the legendary Peter O'Sullivan. Were you sad to leave the weighing room on that last day at Stratford?
Oh, yes, but that was the last day of my job. I was on to a new job. I was excited for the new job. So, yes, that's the one thing you miss, not being able to go back in there. Only jockeys who are riding up to an hour. You can go in an hour before racing starts, and then they clear the room. Even trainers can't go into the jockeys' changing room. The valets, officials, and jockeys. But it's a place where you've broken bones with people. You've helped each other. You've had controversies. So, for 15 years, it's a big change. And they'd asked me 2 years before if I'd join them as paddock commentator, because Jimmy Lindley was doing it, but didn't want to do the winter. He'd like to go shooting, go to Hong Kong, go do all sorts of things. So I turned it down. I had the 5 best horses in the country to ride, because I was riding Beulah at the time. I only rode him for one season. So the job was there, but I wouldn't give up the horses for anything. And then 2 years later, when they offered me the job again, things had changed. John Frankham, who was a boy below me, had come up and was a man now, 10 years younger, patently better. And they offered it to me again. Would it come if I turned it down this time? No. Dead men's shoes. I mean, I held it for 35 years.
Yeah. So when you started, did the jockeys accept you when you started going into the paddock?
Yeah. I was mates with everyone. I can't think of one that there was no animosity. You'd have your ups and downs with people over coming up the inner or giving me light or rubbing you against the rail and that sort of thing. But no, I got on well with them. Well, I'm a personable person. I like people. No animosity whatsoever.
That's a good way to start. And did you get a lot of media training as well?
Oh, none. Absolutely nil. But that was a long time ago, 1975, a long time ago. No, in fact, my first day was not long after the last day of race riding. And, you get your teeth kicked out. I've actually got a bridge, nice bridge, bridge across the gap. But at the time, I had dentures and awful, to try and get your words specifically right on some of the horse names with your teeth wobbling around was a bit difficult. So, I'm into it straight away. The only thing you had to adjust to, and we had it in those days, Stephen, we had a lot of paddock time. They'd come to you in the paddock 10 minutes or more before a race, and we talk about every horse in detail. So the only thing you had to get used to is the producer talking to you in your ear while you are talking live, and not stopping to think and listen to the producer. You've got to keep going. And several times in the early days, a producer would say, "Now look, Richard, I've got a shot and I'm going to bring it up in a minute, but keep talking. Don't stop talking. Keep talking. Say what you want to say. And when I'm ready, I'll tell you." And so they'd say, look, we've got a shot of someone at the parade ring. It's Nubar Gulbenkian, the Greek shipping magnate. Talk about it. What would I know about it? But you've got to keep talking, haven't you? You've got to keep talking. Peter was such a hero to go and work alongside. And in fact, I've got a lovely race card of one of the last days he commentated, and all his colours filled in with his notes, which were fascinating. But on the other side of this cardboard thing were pasted on 2 more smaller races, 8-runner field. And by the side of lots of horses down that part of the page were his bets. Tremendous. He must certainly, normal punters wouldn't get on the bets he can get on now, I can assure you. But of course, I suppose if Peter O'Sullivan was having a bet to any bookmaker, it was a come and join me, wasn't it? He wasn't wasting his money. He invited me in and said, "Look, Richard, it's pretty easy, and just talk to the camera when you're on camera as if it's your best friend, not a camera," which was good. I also said, "Well, what about delivery, Peter?" He said, "Well, Richard, keep talking. That's all I can say. Even if it's rubbish, like when you're a jockey, but keep talking."
Working for the BBC, the race which Richard will always be connected with was the Grand National, and he was in the thick of the action in 1993 for the Void Race, the race that never was, and 4 years later for the Bomb Scare Race. Richard recalls 1993 and 1997.
The Void Race, I used to do the lead up and the paddock, and then as soon as they'd left the paddock, I'd hand over and Peter O'Sullivan would pick up and do the parade. And so I'd been through them all on the paddock, did a reasonable job, and loosened my tie then and sort of sat back ready for all the action to unfold. And void start, bad luck, and then second void start, and producer shouted in my ear, "Pitman, get off your fat backside," only slightly sharper than that, "and find out what's happening." Well, we used to be over right near the road into Liverpool itself, and a little scaffolding thing with an office on top of it on scaffold planks. And I ran out, fell over because they were wet. And I always used to get winded because I'm a fat little fellow. Plonk, down I went. And we have floor managers. So the guy picked me up by his hand and he's whizzing through the crowds, knocking people all over the place with me like an aeroplane in his hand, And he got me to the start, by which time the whole crowd were around Keith Brown, the then starter, wanting the news. But we're the BBC, we pay the rights, we have first call. And the floor manager knocked everyone out of the way and plonked me up on my feet and shoved me there. And I said, "Now, Keith, what can happen?" He said, "I can tell you exactly. Anything that's fallen on the first circuit, or anything that has passed the circuit marker, i.e. jump the water jump, cannot run again should we run." So good, clear guidance, we were doing a good job. To which a fist came through the camera view and didn't land, but it stopped only an inch from Keith Brown's chin. And it was John Upson, who trained the favourite, Zita's lad or son, favourite for the National. And he said, "The next time I see you, it'll be in court." all mayhem. Oh, it was terrible. So anyway, I backed out. I'd done my bit. I'd got the news. And I'm walking back across the course. Producer again in, Pitman, you're not finished yet. Find a steward." So they were all in a porter cabin, 4 ladders up, a scaffold, huge, high, looking straight down the course. And at the bottom was I don't know what sort of guard, big beef eater and a feather in it and a sword. And I've got a cameraman, soundman and me. Bottom of the first ladder, he said, "Oh, you can't come here, son, you can't come here. Stewards are up there." I said, "Yes, they've asked us to go up BBC for an interview. They want to tell people what's happening." Of course, they hadn't. So up the ladders, not easy with a camera on the chap's shoulder. Got to the top, very high, and I knocked on the porter cabin door and said to, said hello or something, "Can you answer the door?" Out came Patrick Hibbert Foy, who was the senior stipendiary steward, little tiny chap. "Yes, Pitman, what do you want?" "This is the stewards deliberating, talking here. It's private." I said, "I know, Patrick, but we're live into Hong Kong. The world is watching us. We need to know." And he said very superciliously, "There are 70,000 people here, and they need to know before any news gets out to anyone else. Goodbye," and slammed the door. I mean, it was so wrong. It was wrong. They did after that realize that it's such a big event that you have to be media savvy. And now, of course, Stephen, you see it. There are cameras everywhere, aren't they? In stalls, on jockeys, here, there, everywhere. It's fantastic, the access that they have now. I was on air as it happened, talking about the horses, you see, and all of a sudden, producer again says, Pitman, there's something happening. Talk about it. They're evacuating the Queen Mother stand, or is it the Princess Royal? Anyway, the Queen Mother, I think, isn't it? So shots of them, everyone going and being put onto the course. Now, how would I know what it was? No one knew. So I said, they're evacuating the Queen Mother stand, and I'm sure it's only a fire extinguisher. Someone's being silly. Something's gone off, We'll be back in 20 minutes. I'm sure about that. Anyway, 2.5 days later, when we went back, and I switched back to off air so I could look around and say, anyone know what's happening? No. So I carry on talking. And 2 Liverpudlian police women came into my little domain, my little hut on the scaffolding. And I switched back off from being live. And I said, excuse me, sorry, but we're on air. And they came across and lifted me by the elbows and said, you're not now, and took me out. But the BBC were brilliant, Stephen. I mean, they went back like defending a battle station. They went back to the car park owners and trainers. Des Lynam held it as long as he could, and everyone else was moved out. It was done with a military precision. But the last person that we had that they couldn't reach or didn't think of reaching was Jim McGrath, Aussie Jim, who was down at the canal between Canal Turn and Beaches, up a big scaffolding in his own little box, chatting away there. And I could hear in the background from the control truck saying, Jim, keep talking. We're still here. We'll get other pictures and talk over them when you get them. And he spoke for 24 minutes, He was absolutely brilliant.
Richard had another memorable day at Aintree when he rode in the Legends Flat Race before the 2012 Grand National. Richard takes up the story.
I'd given a kidney away 10 weeks before the race, and I wanted to ride in the Legends race. I was 69. I've only got one eye. That eye doesn't work. Again, being kicked in the face, both, two hoos in the face. And I wanted to do it. They'd run out of Legends, so there was room for me to join the Legends race. And it was the first race of the day, Grand National Day. It was great. Mick Kinnan, 13 times champion jockey, he was in it. Oh, and all the Grand National winning jockeys were there. It was superb. The day when I got there to get ready, the chief medical officer said, look, I'm not going to let you ride. You've only got one eye. You've only just recovered from your kidney. And I'm also working for the Beeb. 17 minutes after the finish of the race, I was to be in my position, ready for my first interview. It was a pretty tight schedule. Anyway, I couldn't find any boots to fit me. Eventually, I stuffed my legs into someone's boots, but there was still 3 inches of flesh out the back, so we just round black tape around it, you see. So I'm taped up before I'm going out. And it was a marvellous race. But before then, the stewards called us in and said, now, boys, look, eyes of the world are on you, don't go mad, play jockeys, don't play soldiers, da-da-da-da-da. And by the way, there is a geriatric, one-eyed person riding in the race. If he's in trouble, give him some light. And they all, led by Kinnan, said, oh, to hell with him. He can look after himself. There was no camaraderie then, I can show you. But I was also mic'd up. So to commentate on the way round, and Jim McGrath would drop in every now and again if he thought it was pertinent. So right from the start, I popped in a little bit behind them, and I'm saying, oh, up front, there's so-and-so going well, and I'd like to be on that one, and daddy. I'm talking away all the way around. And then down the back straight, they suddenly realised that I'm talking away to myself. And no one knew I was mic'd up, you see. And they must have thought I was totally mad. Anyway, it finished. It didn't do anything great, but I was 69, one eye, one kidney, only just recovered. I thought it was one of the most exciting things I'd done. It was a bit of self-gratification, wasn't it?
And of course, BBC kept losing race courses and finished 2012. That must have been a sad day when you finished on the BBC.
Yes, it was. It was inevitable, I suppose, because of money. Sky coming up could buy things, and other Channel 4, and then ITV saw that it was a great opening. We lost it in one fell swoop, having been 35 years in it. But, I've been involved ever since, one way or another, either doing jobs for Aintree on the Day and Aintree TV, and with the virtual Grand National. I mean, what a success that was.
Yeah, you've had a few more
year.
rides with the virtual Grand National. Yeah. You're still not winning.
Yeah,
but,
never winning. And Chris keeps going further and further back. Yeah. But, so one way and another, I've been involved since 1967 when I rode Foynaven's year and Phillip the Third.
Let's go to our panel to hear what they had to say about Richard's broadcasting career.
Richard, as a broadcaster, was excellent. He knew his stuff. When everything went wrong, he used to very jokingly say something and put it right. He was very. He wasn't opinionated, which was nice to be around someone that wasn't so. It wasn't raw. He used to be very much as a person you sort of sat next to him on the settee and having a chat over a cup of coffee, and that's the way he was when he broadcast. And he was very passionate about jockeys, as he was a very good jockey himself. And he rode with my father, so he knew my father and mother very well. So we go back quite a few years. But he always made you feel very easy. Apart from when I used to go in the morning, first thing in the morning, and arrive, he said, "Hello, Daisy." I don't know where he got that name from. He used to make a name up for everybody around the studio. But, I always enjoyed working with Richard. We always had a bit of a banter, probably because we came from the same roots, really, with him riding with father and being an elite jump jockey. But he's always been a fun chap to work with.
What did you think when he moved from the saddle to work for the BBC as a broadcaster? And how good was he as a broadcaster?
Well, I think it was a natural progression because, one thing you could always say about Richard was he could talk. He could talk. In fact, you could say he was full of bullshit for a lot of time. I mean, he was the weighing room's arch bullshitter, was Richard. And so, quite honestly, I couldn't think of anyone better suited than being a television pundit, because that's what they need.
It was really interesting, the broadcasting that he was a part of in the, what would you say, the 80s and early 90s. Because it was a group of people who I'd known growing up. So it was as if all the people who I used to see in the Lambourne Valley when I was a little girl and my dad was training horses were all suddenly on the telly. It was John Frankham, it was Jay Oaksey and Richard Pitman. And there was something terribly reassuring about those voices. And they were all actually beautiful broadcasters. I thought of them all as jockeys. But if you look back now, you think they were so polished. Their balance of humour, slight silliness, profound knowledge, great enthusiasm was absolutely astonishing. But you didn't think of them as broadcasters. It was just like they got these lovely, horse blokes to come into the studio and say something about the racing. So it was like you were going to the races every Saturday with a bunch of friends. And Richard was very much that. He was such a relaxed broadcaster. He was really self-deprecating, which he always was. There was no swagger to him. He wasn't going into studios with a great big, well, do you know what I did in the King George? Or do you remember Pendle? There was none of that. And it was exactly the same in real life. So there was that, as a broadcaster, there was that naturalness, enthusiasm, always the sense of humour, and just a sense of, I don't know, a good bloke, which is unsurprising because he is a really good bloke.
Before the birthday jingles and late on the scene in this podcast is Richard's close friend, Charlie Fenwick, with his own interesting take on the 1973 Grand National.
And the other thing that is so interesting to me, Richard Pitman becomes for the next 30 some years, everyone knows Richard Pitman. He's a television star of sorts, and an author. And Richard Pitman gets to be famous because he lost the Grand National. Just the same way Dick Francis gets to be famous because he lost the Grand National. I think that's sort of an interesting story to me. And both guys are much more famous because they lost than if they'd won. There's a winner every year, but there's not many performances like Dick Francis' performance or Richard Pitman's performance in the Grand National.
To end this special podcast, a few friends dropped in to wish you a happy birthday, Richard.
Hello, Richard. It's Sam Martin, and I just wanted to wish you a very, very happy birthday. Thank you so much for all of your support with my fledgling journalism career, and I really enjoy working with you. Your advice is so valuable to me, and I really hope you have an amazing day.
Happy birthday, Richard, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Richard Pitman, happy birthday, you old devil, you. And you're always a bit of a rascal, especially joking around at the races when we used to do it together many years ago. We had great mornings, great fun, bit of banter. You're always great fun and had always raw material. Love working with you. So have a happy birthday today, Richard. The big 8-0 you got there.
I am honored to wish my dear friend Richard Pitman a happy birthday. I didn't really expect to be wishing him happy birthday in this fashion, but I'm honored to be doing so. Richard and I have been friends for 20 plus years, and I'm not sure, I don't have many closer friends than Richard. We speak at least once a week, often about nothing, but we speak. And I visit England probably twice a year. And I now have a daughter living outside of Oxford, so I stay with her often, but virtually every visit I will spend some time with Richard and Mandy, and I love it. Same bedroom. I even have some clothes I've left there. Always for the Cheltenham Festival, we stay with them. So I am, Richard is a wonderful human being. He is a very kind, thoughtful, loyal friend. And I guess this is number 80. For some reason, Richard thinks that's a number that you sort of set a barrier or what you will and won't do after you're 80. Although I think he's trying to, I don't know what's going on, but there was a talk about having a schooling session, and then that got postponed. And but it's important that Richard do school some horses over fences. He's been talking about it, but he also talks about maybe not doing it and maybe not going up to Aintree. I think he didn't go to Aintree last year. It's the first time maybe in his life. Don't really understand why that has to happen. But it is what it is. So I personally want to wish Richard a happy birthday and many more to come.
I'm so delighted that you asked me, because I just love to be able to send out a huge, great, big birthday shout out to the legendary Richard Pitman. He'll hate me for saying that. I should think there are very few people who would regard themselves less as a legend, but he really was. He was of that incredible generation. He was a wonderful man to watch over a fence, and goodness me, he did know how to meet triumph and tragedy and treat them the same. And the fact that he's still here and we can all say happy birthday, thanks to the wonders of new technology, is a beautiful thing. So happy birthday, Richard, and I hope you have a glorious day.
I'd like to thank Sam Martin, Phillip Blacker, Gay Kelleway, Charlie Fenwick, Tania Kindersley and Chris Pitt for their help at short notice with this podcast. It would not have been the same without you all. Happy birthday, Richard. Thanks for all your help over the past 2 years. Have a fabulous 80th birthday.
Happy birthday!
Thank you for listening to the Paddock and the Pavilion.
Follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at The Pad and Pad. Don't forget, if you like the show, please do leave us a rating and review.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Why?
If you have T-Mobile 5G home internet, you might be hearing this a lot.
Why?
Every time your internet slows down during the busiest hours.
Why?
Because your network gives priority to cell phone users.
Why?
Good question. Why not switch to Cox Internet with 2 times faster download speeds than T-Mobile 5G home internet during peak hours?
Okay.
Stop the whys and visit cox.com/5G home for details. T-Mobile prioritizes certain T-Mobile phone users over home internet users during times of congestion.